Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of the Low Carbon Investment Conference. And we all had an action-packed first day, and it's my job to just remind you of a couple of the highlights in case anybody's a little bit bleary-headed this morning. First of all, starting with the dinner, it was a real sort of glittering environment that we were in last night. Fantastic room and very well upkept. And for me, there were really three highlights of the dinner in particular. First of all, I may be incredibly unsophisticated, but I've never eaten a plate with two different cuts of beef on it before, and I thought that was very interesting, very tasty. Second thing, the pipe band was fantastic, and I don't know whether anybody else noticed, but when the First Minister and Senor Galan presented the quaich to the pipe major, I don't know what was in the quaich, but when he drank it, he seemed to stagger back quite perceptively for a minute or so, and certainly must have been something quite potent. And then we had an address from Senor Galan, which was very enlightening, and he came up with some really big numbers for investment. He said the UK would be the first destination for investment for Iberdrola in the next 2 years, and he mentioned a figure of 4 billion, I think, attached to that timescale. And he also mentioned 12 billion over the next decade. So it's really heartening to see that big investors, big utilities and generators are prepared to put that kind of money into the UK. He also had a comment on electricity market reform. He said that we've spent 2 years talking about it, and 2 years is a long time. I think he was very polite there. He didn't use the word sufficiente, but certainly I think we've seen yesterday that there's a real sort of hunger from everybody at this conference to get this issue of electricity market reform resolved and clear the air and move on so investors can make more decisions. As far as the sessions yesterday were concerned, it really was a call to action all round from everybody that we really got to get some of these projects moving, get the pipelines really happening so the UK doesn't fall behind in some of these key technologies. And I suppose you could say when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I've got two confessions because in my presentation yesterday morning, I don't know if you remember, but there was a slide where there were all the sort of projects in clean energy worldwide in the third quarter with sort of flags attached down the left-hand margin. And I actually misidentified one of the flags, which was the Turkish flag. I think I said it was the Chinese flag, but the two are vaguely similar. But what's interesting about Turkey is it's one of those really exciting markets for clean energy this year, just on the fringes, just beyond the fringes of Europe. Another one is Morocco, and another one, funny enough, is Ukraine. So although the sort of core countries of Europe in some cases are seeing slower activity, there's more activity going on just beyond those places. Another delegate came up to me and said I hadn't said enough about water. And it's certainly the case that in some countries, and China is a good example, they're looking at the water consumption of the power sector, particularly things like coal mining, the washing of the coal and the actual consumption of coal in power stations, and realizing that there's a real constraint there in terms of how much coal generation they can do. And one of the big advantages of renewable energy is that it doesn't use much water, certainly not the two main renewable energy technologies. So we had a very decisive start from the First Minister when he talked, and he actually took decision straight away to rename the capital city Old Low Reekie. And amazed that the newspapers haven't picked up on that, because it's not every day that a major city in the UK is renamed. But very good to see some action there. And he also said that it was a moral imperative for the hydrocarbon nations to lead the way on renewable energy deployment. And I hope we'll see that in the next few years. And it's good to see places like Saudi Arabia, for instance, now becoming very active on the solar front. He also announced that the Renewable Energy Investment Fund, which is made up of £100 million from the Ofgem account, is now open for business and is going to help funding wave and tidal projects and also community energy projects and district heating. So a clear piece of action there. Lady Susan Rice told us how her bank has invested £3 billion in loans for 45 projects in renewable energy in the last few years. I attended the finance panel. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend any of the panels that were going on at the same time as each other, obviously, but I found that one very interesting. Stephen Crane of Green Investments saying that the GIB would hope to help projects that are out there at the moment but are just not getting closed because they need an extra 20 or 30 million pounds or so. So that could be a sort of quick piece of action that the GIB could take. The representative from Lloyds Development Capital made some interesting comments about coal-fired power stations and about how the option of extending their lifetimes may actually not be there as an option in many cases because they're coming to the end where the plant is actually pretty clapped out and it would be very costly to get it all set up for another few years. So that really puts the emphasis on how do we make sure there is enough capacity for the second half of this decade. And that made me think about if it's difficult to finance renewable energy projects because of the situation of financial markets, how much more difficult must it be to finance fossil fuel power stations when you go to the bank saying you're going to build a new fossil fuel power station, then you've really got no idea what the capacity factor of the plant is going to be because you don't know how many hours in a day it's actually going to be economic to run it. You don't know what the lifetime of the plant is either because the way climate change may develop, there may be new regulations coming in at any point in the future. So it sounds like quite a difficult proposition to get finance. So maybe we're better off in renewables than in conventional in that sense. Just finally, on the boardroom debate yesterday, there was quite a bit of impatience, I thought, amongst the supply chain companies for projects to get going and for the UK and Scotland's famous pipeline of offshore wind projects really to move forward more quickly. And there was talk about the danger of other countries actually getting ahead of the UK and Scotland. I mentioned in my presentation how the Chinese offshore wind programme looks as if it's going to be going pretty strong guns by the middle of this decade. So the UK and Germany have got that as a possible competitor on the horizon pretty quickly. And also the representative of Mitsubishi yesterday said that the Japanese government talking decisively now about offshore wind, and I think he was kind of saying that they were talking almost more decisively than we were in the UK. Admittedly, it's the floating variety there, but that's obviously going to be another real centre of activity. And there was also a call in that session for the UK government to put in a clear statement on decarbonisation in its electricity market reform as a way of really boosting investors' confidence and preventing a situation where investors have been rather thrown sideways by apparent disagreements at a high level about what sort of technologies the UK is backing. So that would seem like a good note to call upon Ed Davey, the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, to make his address to this conference. Welcome, Secretary of State.